The night was cool and still when Sarah stepped out of the house. The music and laughter from the party faded the moment the door closed behind her. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves, the kind that fall quietly onto sidewalks in late autumn. She pulled her coat tighter around her, partly because of the chill, partly because she felt a strange emptiness pressing on her chest. Mark, her husband, had gone home hours ago. He'd leaned in at the party earlier that night and whispered, "I'm heading out. Not feeling well." She'd touched his arm and nodded. But his eyes had already looked past her toward the door. That was how it had been between them lately. Polite, distant, as if they were two people who lived together, but no longer shared the same life. She had stayed at the party, moving between conversations, smiling when she needed to, laughing at the right moments. She told herself it was just to be polite, but deep down she didn't want to go home to the silence that waited for her there. The party wasn't even that exciting. It was just the comfort of being around people, of feeling the warmth of voices and the hum of music done now. Outside, most of the guests were already gone. Cars were pulling away one by one, their headlights sweeping across the driveway before disappearing into the dark street. Sarah reached for her phone to call a cab, only to remember the battery had died earlier in the evening. She had forgotten to bring her charger, and she didn't want to bother anyone inside just for that. Need a ride. She turned at the sound of the voice. It was Daniel, Mark's best friend since college. He stood a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, his tall frame outlined by the porch light. She'd seen him here and there over the years, mostly at gatherings like this. Their conversations had always been short, friendly, the kind you have with someone who was part of your life only because they're part of someone else's. "Only if it's not out of your way," Sarah replied, trying to sound casual. "It's no trouble?" he said, smiling. There was something in his voice, a warmth. Maybe that made her pause for half a second before following him to his car. The moment she sat down, she noticed the faint, clean scent of his cologne mixed with the subtle smell of leather seats. It wasn't overpowering, but it was enough to make her aware of it. She buckled her seat belt, and for some reason, the sound of the click seemed unusually loud in the quiet car. They pulled out of the driveway, street lights casting brief shadows across his face as they passed. Sarah glanced at him in the glow of the dashboard lights. His profile was strong, a straight nose, a steady jawline, but it wasn't his looks that caught her attention. It was his expression, calm, focused, but softer when he glanced her way. She told herself not to read into it. It was late. She'd had a couple of glasses of wine. She was tired, that was all. "Did you have a good time?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "It was nice," she said, though the truth was she'd barely felt present all night. "Been a while since I've been to something like this." "You used to go to everything," he said. "At least that's how I remember it." Sarah smiled faintly. "That was a long time ago." The traffic lights changed from green to red, and he slowed to a stop. For a brief moment, their eyes met. It was nothing more than a quick glance, but there was something unspoken there. She looked away, suddenly aware of her heartbeat. The car moved forward again, and she kept her gaze fixed on the passing streets. The neighborhoods looked quiet, windows glowing faintly in the dark. She wondered how many of those houses were filled with laughter and how many were filled with the same heavy silence she felt at home. Daniel spoke again, his tone lighter. "Mark mentioned you've been busy with work lately." She nodded. "Keeps me occupied." It was the simplest answer she could give without opening a door she wasn't ready to walk through. He didn't press, but she could feel his attention. Not in an uncomfortable way, but in a way that made her feel noticed and that she realized was something she hadn't felt in a long time. As they drove, the hum of the engine and the soft music on the radio filled the space between them. It was quiet but not empty. Sarah found herself wondering why she'd never really talked to Daniel before, beyond the polite exchanges at barbecues or holiday dinners. When they reached another red light, he glanced at her again, and this time he didn't look away right away. His gaze wasn't intense, but it was steady, like he was seeing her. Not just looking at her, but actually seeing her. She shifted in her seat, suddenly aware of the warmth in her cheeks. She reminded herself that this was Daniel, her husband's friend, someone she had known for years in the background of her life. There was nothing unusual about him giving her a ride, and yet, as they continued down the quiet streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this moment. This simple late-night drive was different. By the time they were halfway to her house, she found herself stealing quick glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. She told herself it was just curiosity, that she was only noticing him more because they were alone, 'cause there was nothing else to distract her. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just that. There was a quiet pull in the air between them, the kind that didn't need words to exist. And though she didn't want to admit it, part of her wondered if Daniel felt it, too. She leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of the car surround her. She didn't know where this ride would lead, not just on the road, but in ways she couldn't yet name. And that uncertainty, it both unsettled her and made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. The road stretched out ahead of them, quiet and empty, as though the world had gone to sleep, and left only the two of them awake. The soft hum of the tires on the asphalt filled the silence, mixed with the gentle music playing from the car's speakers, which was an old song, slow with a warm melody, the kind you don't hear often anymore. She recognized it, but couldn't remember the title. At first, they spoke about harmless things. Daniel asked about her job, about the people they both knew, and about the party they had just left. She answered politely, keeping her voice even as if this were any other late-night ride home. But even with such small talk, there was something in the way he listened that made it feel different. He didn't nod distractedly or change the subject too quickly. He looked at her when she spoke, as if her words mattered. The houses they passed had their porch lights on, casting little pools of yellow light onto the sidewalks. Sarah found herself watching them and imagining the people inside, families watching TV, couples having quiet conversations, children sleeping in their beds. It made her wonder if her own home looked that warm from the outside, even though inside it felt so cold lately. After a while, the conversation slowed and a peaceful quiet settled over them. That was when Daniel spoke again, his voice slower, gentler than before. "I can tell you're not happy lately," he said. The words hit her like a soft but unexpected wave. She turned her head to look at him, but he kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the steering wheel. She wondered what had given her away. Had she been that transparent? Or was it simply that Daniel was the kind of person who noticed things others didn't? Sarah forced a small laugh. "That's a big assumption." "It's not," he said quietly. "I've known you long enough to see the difference." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. She didn't want to talk about this. Not here, not with him. But at the same time, there was a strange safety in the fact that he wasn't Mark, that he wasn't someone she lived with every day. Maybe that made it easier. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Complicated doesn't mean you have to go through it alone," Daniel replied. His tone wasn't pushy. It was careful, almost hesitant, like he was afraid she might close off completely if he said too much. Sarah turned to face the window, watching the street lights pass by. She could see the faint reflection of her own face in the glass, her eyes darker than usual, her lips pressed together. The truth was, she had been holding herself together for so long that she didn't even know how to let go anymore. They passed through a small downtown area, its shops closed and streets empty except for a few parked cars. The soft rain had started, barely noticeable at first, just a mist against the windshield. It gave the night an even quieter, more intimate feeling. Daniel said after a pause, not in a bad way, just quieter. "Like something's weighing on you." Sarah didn't answer right away. She didn't know if she wanted to open up or if it was safer to keep her walls up. "Life changes," she said softly. Daniel gave a small nod as if he understood. "It does, but sometimes the hardest part isn't the change itself. It's pretending you're fine when you're not." His words made her chest tighten. She wondered if he knew how closely he had touched the truth. She wondered if he could see the cracks in the smile she wore in public. It was the way Mark no longer seemed to. She thought of the early years with her husband, how they used to stay up late talking, how a single touch from him used to feel like home. Those days felt far away now, like a memory she could see but not reach. She didn't know if Daniel could sense all of that, or if he was simply speaking from what he'd observed. The rain grew a little heavier, the sound soft but steady against the roof of the car. Sarah leaned her head slightly toward the window, not enough to rest it, just enough to feel the faint vibration of the glass beneath her hair. She closed her eyes for a second, letting herself breathe in the calm of the moment. When she opened them again, Daniel's hands were still steady on the wheel, his expression focused yet calm. So there was no judgment in his face, no pity, just a quiet presence, as if he was willing to sit in whatever silence she needed. They reached another red light. The glow from the signal reflected on the wet pavement, making the road look like it was lit from below. Daniel glanced at her briefly, and in that brief look, she felt something unspoken. A question maybe, or a thought he wasn't saying out loud. Sarah quickly looked away, her heart giving a strange, uneven beat. She didn't know why she was reacting this way. This was Daniel, someone she had known for years without a single moment like this between them. And yet, tonight felt different. The light turned green and the car moved forward again. The city began to fade into quieter streets, the kind lined with trees whose branches arched over the road. The rain softened again, turning into a mist. Sarah thought about telling him something real. Maybe not everything, but something. But each time she opened her mouth, the words stayed trapped in her throat. It wasn't fear of him. It was fear of what she might admit to herself if she started speaking. They drove on in that delicate quiet, the kind that felt balanced between comfort and tension. Sarah knew she should keep her thoughts to herself, that it was safer to stay inside the boundaries they had always had. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the way being with Daniel tonight felt different. It wasn't just the conversation or the late hour. It was the way he seemed to see her in a way no one had in a long time. It was the way his voice softened when he said her name. She told herself not to imagine anything more. But the thought lingered anyway, quietly sitting in the corner of her mind. And though the night was still young, Sarah had a feeling this drive would leave a mark she wouldn't easily forget. The rain came suddenly, as if the night had decided to close them off from the rest of the world. One moment, the roads were just damp and glistening under the street lights. The next, the rain was falling hard. The drops sharpened fast against the windshield. Daniel slowed the car, the wipers swishing back and forth in a steady rhythm, trying to keep up. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. The sound of the rain filled the car, drowning out the soft music that had been playing. She could feel the air shift, not just because of the weather, but because of something else, something she couldn't quite name. The streets ahead were nearly empty. The rain made it harder to see, the red and white lights of distant cars blurring like watercolor paint. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the road. Then, without a word, he pulled the car to the side and parked beneath the small awning of a closed cafe. The rain poured harder now, drumming against the roof. They were just far enough under the awning to keep the windshield mostly dry, but beyond that, the street was a sheet of moving silver. Sarah could see the reflections of neon signs from across the road rippling in the puddles. Daniel turned off the engine. The sudden stillness made her aware of how small the space between them felt. She glanced at him, and in the soft, uneven light from the street lamp outside, she saw something in his expression. Not nervousness exactly, but a kind of hesitation, like he was weighing whether to say something. Sarah. His voice was low, and there was a pause before he continued. I don't want to cross a line here. Her heart gave a quick, hard beat. She didn't move, didn't speak. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear what he might say next. And yet she did. He looked down for a moment, his fingers tapping once against the steering wheel. I've noticed the way you've been holding yourself together, and I can't pretend I haven't. He stopped mid-sentence, pressing his lips together as if swallowing the words. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Haven't what? She asked quietly. Daniel's eyes met hers, and for a brief second, the air in the car seemed to thicken. His gaze wasn't intense in a demanding way, but it was steady enough to make her feel completely seen. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes flicked to her lips just for the smallest fraction of a moment before returning to her eyes. That tiny movement sent a shiver through her, one she tried to ignore. The rain kept falling, a steady curtain between them and the rest of the world. Sarah felt her breath slow, as if the night itself was holding its breath with her. She told herself this was just a moment, that she was tired, that the late hour and the quiet were making everything feel more intense than it really was. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the truth. This wasn't new, wasn't sudden. The quiet pull between them had been there for years, hiding behind polite smiles and safe conversations. Daniel finally spoke again, his voice softer now. I've noticed you more than I should. I'm sorry if that's out of line. Her chest tightened, not with anger, but with something far more complicated. She should have told him to stop, should have reminded him of the boundaries between them. But instead, she stayed still, her hands unmoving in her lap, her eyes locked on his. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease, but inside the car, the tension only grew. Sarah felt every inch of the space between them, aware of how easily she could reach out and touch his arm if she wanted to. She didn't. Neither did he. But the thought lingered there, heavy and unspoken. For a moment, neither of them looked away. Sarah could see the faint reflection of herself in his eyes. It made her wonder if he could see the same mix of emotions in hers. The confusion, the longing, the fear. Finally, she looked down, breaking the connection. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She didn't know if she was relieved or disappointed. Daniel leaned back slightly in his seat, but his voice stayed quiet. I just don't want you to forget your worth more than the way you've been made to feel lately. The words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't ask him how he knew. She didn't have to. The rain slowed to a soft drizzle, and the street outside looked washed clean. But for Sarah, nothing felt simple anymore. She knew she should draw the line here, should make sure nothing in this moment could be mistaken for more than it was. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to erase it either. Daniel started the car again, his movements calm, measured, as if giving her space to breathe. The tires splashed through shallow puddles as they pulled back onto the road. Sarah turned her face toward the window, watching the blurred lights pass by. Her reflection looked the same as it always did, same eyes, same mouth, but inside something had shifted. This night, this pause under the awning, this almost conversation they had, it was going to stay with her, not because anything had happened, but because of everything that almost did. The drive continued after the rain eased, the streets now glistening under the faint glow of streetlights. Sarah sat quietly, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The night air coming through the slightly cracked window felt cool against her skin, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and the faint scent of blooming flowers from nearby yards. It was peaceful, yet her mind was anything but calm. Daniel didn't speak immediately. He drove steadily, his eyes focused on the road, but occasionally glanced at her with a softness that made her stomach flutter. Sarah didn't look at him. She couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready to face the storm of emotions that seemed to swirl between them, emotions that were neither words nor actions, yet heavy and alive. The ride had felt longer than it was. Each block, each corner seemed to stretch time. Sarah kept thinking about the almost moments that had happened during the drive. The pause under the cafe awning, the way his voice had softened, the way he had looked at her. She wondered if Mark, her husband, would ever notice the way she had been fading slowly, quietly. Without complaint, she thought of the years, the routines, the small silences at home that had grown louder over time, and she realized that Daniel had seen what no one else had. Finally, he pulled up to her house. The familiar sight of her front porch and garden felt strange now, almost alien after the intensity of the drive. Sarah could see her reflection in the darkened windows, the same face she had always known, but with a subtle weight she couldn't ignore. She wasn't just tired from the night. She was tired of pretending everything was fine. Daniel killed the engine. The sudden quiet of the parked car made Sarah's heart beat faster. She felt like a child caught in a storm, unsure whether to run inside or stay in the safe cocoon of the car. "I'll walk you to the door," Daniel said softly. Sarah hesitated. Something inside her wanted to stay in the car, to prolong the unspoken connection that had grown between them tonight. But she nodded anyway, stepping out into the cool, damp night. The air smelled of rain and soil, and her shoes made soft, squelching sounds on the wet pavement. They walked slowly toward the front door. Sarah's keys jingled in her hand, but she didn't rush. She found herself stealing glances at Daniel, who seemed calm but alert, as if he too felt the weight of what had passed in the car. Neither spoke much. Words weren't necessary. The silence carried more meaning than any sentence could. At the door, Sarah paused. Her hand hovered over the keyhole, and she realized she didn't want to step inside yet. Didn't want to leave the small, fragile world that had formed between them tonight. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice quiet but sincere. Daniel nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "You don't have to thank me. Just take care of yourself." His words, simple as they were, made her chest ache. There was no hint of judgment, no demand, just a quiet care that made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. She wanted to tell him so much about the loneliness she felt, the small heartbreaks that accumulated day by day, the longing she had buried under years of routine. But the words stayed inside, too fragile, too dangerous. Sarah finally turned the key and stepped inside. The familiar warmth of her home felt comforting, but it also highlighted the emptiness that had grown over the years. She could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator, and the quiet of a house that felt too big for one person. Daniel stayed at the doorway, giving her a moment. "Good night, Sarah," he said softly. "Good night," she replied, her voice carrying more weight than usual. She watched him walk back to his car, his figure small in the dim porch light. There was a tension in her chest, a mix of relief, longing, and something else she couldn't name. Once he drove away, the house seemed even quieter. Sarah closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, her eyes closing as she tried to steady her breath. The night's events had stirred something deep inside her, something that couldn't be undone. She realized that life would continue as it always had, but the ride tonight had left a mark, subtle, invisible, but undeniable. She thought about Daniel, about the gentle way he had seen her, about the pause under the awning, about the words that almost passed between them. She knew she would carry those moments with her, not as a secret to act on, but as a reminder that she was seen, that she was noticed, that she mattered in a way she hadn't felt in years. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through her windows, warm and golden, but it couldn't erase the night. Sarah moved through her routine with a quiet awareness, remembering the soft hum of the car. The way Daniel's hands had stayed steady, the way he had looked at her with understanding. She realized that life didn't need dramatic changes to be meaningful. Sometimes it was the small, unspoken moments that mattered most. A conversation in a car, a shared silence, a look that lingered just long enough to be felt. And while nothing had changed between her and Mark yet, she knew something inside her had shifted. Sarah didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would ever tell Daniel what she felt or if she would continue to navigate the quiet heartache of her marriage. But she knew one thing: she had been reminded of her own heart, her own desires, and the quiet power of being truly seen. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah thought of the rain, of the quiet streets, of Daniel's voice, and the weight of unspoken words. She felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for what was missing in her life. Hope for the understanding she had found, even if only for a brief night. And in that balance of longing and care, Sarah realized that some moments, no matter how fleeting, could change a person forever.